We're live?
Yes.
We're live.
We are live.
We are live. We are live. Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Midweek Mochas at the Owlery. Got your mocha. While for many, summer has just begun. And if you've recently made the decision to homeschool or to change your approach, now is an excellent time to evaluate your options for this fall. So we're going to take a brief break from, dragging kids to camp and pool and doing all the fun stuff of summer. And we're just going to spend some time today. We'd like to offer 3 questions you should ask yourself before you buy Curricula. Laura?
All right. So first the 3 questions, and then we'll dig in a little deeper. First one, why are you homeschooling? Second, where is your comfort zone? And third, what are your resources and constraints? So first, why are you homeschooling? And the reason you want to ask yourself this is going to be the one that's going to drive your goals more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Your why is going to help you cut down from thousands of options to at least a quarter of that. And from there, the other questions are going to help pare it back further. One way to think about this, I have a friend. When she began homeschooling, was initially only planning to homeschool for a year. I think her son was in first grade. Teacher at the end of the year drove her aside.
Yeah,
said,
he was going into second or third grade. I don't remember.
One of the early elementary said, "Look, your son's wonderful. He's a great student. He is not going to be a good fit for the teacher that I know he's going to have next."
And this
year.
was 30 years ago.
Oh yeah,
this was 30.
Yeah,
years ago.
they were second wave homeschoolers.
Yeah, easily.
And so it wasn't as scary as it would have been to try homeschooling in the 60s, but it was still a big step. But they said, okay, we'll pull them out for a year and see how that does. And so that year, their reason for homeschooling was they wanted their son in an environment where he was going to continue being encouraged in schooling. So they weren't trying to go
Did you want to put your headphones on and make sure we actually have audio before we get too far into this episode?
We have audio.
We have audio. Yay.
All right. So here, and let me move our microphone.
Make sure we don't lose the audio when we move the mic because, we've done that before.
Yes, we have.
All right. Why is that cord caught? Okay. I need to troubleshoot that rat's nest.
Okay.
Little slice of life.
Yes. Anyway, so their goal that year was give their son a good environment to homeschool in. And at that point, they were thinking.
And then they were going to put him back in for the following grade.
And so for that year, they were just like, okay, this is what we're doing. A completely different reason might be.
They ended up homeschooling him all the way through high school.
They loved it. And, once they realized we like doing this, their why changed.
Yes.
It wasn't just keep him well educated for the year that he needs to be in an environment where he's being well encouraged to other reasons. And your why does change. If you're doing a reassessment, it might be because you initially pulled out during the pandemic as a safety issue, or just you had to because everyone said that, everyone had to be home. And now you're realizing there's different things that you're getting out of homeschooling. This is the time to realize, okay, I've got goals for education. Get them a little more clear in your head. I think one of yours was that you wanted Latin to be important and not just a high school option, but something that you could start much earlier.
Yeah, it's one of my personal quirks that I think the single most important thing anyone can study at all, period, regardless of what they end up doing in life, is the Latin language.
Now, to make it clear to our listeners, we're not telling you need to do Latin. We're saying
absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's like its own episode. That's its own course series. If you're interested, let us know. Yeah. We'll be happy to share that information.
But it's more know what it is that you care about. And for you, it was Latin.
For me, it was Latin taught a certain way.
Yeah.
It was more than just, I need to find a school where they take Latin seriously. I found schools where they take at least Koine Greek seriously. I found schools where they had really solid liberal arts programs. I found a few schools where the school would do Latin, but I disagreed with the approach that they took. It was anyway, without going down that rabbit hole. That was the initial reason I was looking seriously at homeschooling. There were other social reasons. There were economic reasons.
And if
But
I recall, the most recent HSLDA court reporter actually went through and had an interesting survey about reasons people homeschooled, and in fact, it changes over
it
time.
does shift, and why we are homeschooling. For us, why we are homeschooling has not fundamentally changed year over year, but we have lots of friends who've been homeschooling and some who decided that their homeschooling journey had ended. They put their kids back in institutional schools. The kids are thriving, the families are thriving. So at no point should you take from us that homeschooling is the one true way and that you have to do it this way or you're doing it wrong. No, that is not what we are trying to communicate. If you're embarking on this adventure of home education, if you're struggling with this adventure of home education, and whether your kid or not your kids are in an institutional school for a significant chunk of the year, you're still involved in home education.
Yeah.
And that is something we want to convey. But why? Why are you doing this? Why are you taking on this burden? What are the goals you hope to accomplish? You may or may not accomplish this, but at least have them clearly defined. You have to begin with the end in mind.
All right. So that is definitely one of those questions that you want to have, because that's going to help you start saying, okay, if my reason is partly faith-based, I can start looking and saying, all right, I'm going to start focusing my attention on materials that are going to support that goal.
Right.
And that's part of how that end in mind starts informing your decisions. The next one is where your comfort zone is.
That's a big one.
And
that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people.
And
I know that was a stumbling block for you.
Oh, completely.
It still is.
Yes.
We've been doing this 2 decades and it's still a stumbling block for you.
Yes, it is. I take a while to warm to new ideas.
Just a little.
Just a little.
Just a little.
Yes. And you need to know that about yourself. And that way, if you, all right, so if you're going to a homeschool conference.
Oh my.
Oh,
homeschool conferences are wonderful, wonderful things.
But they can be overwhelming.
But they're like any trade show. You have lots of vendors and everybody's selling shiny materials that they promise are going to transform your life.
And if you go to one of the sessions where you have someone giving a talk, they can be really inspiring.
Yeah.
They can inspire you to do things that you might not actually be ready for.
Yes.
And so help to know where yourself is. Now, this isn't to say don't grow. In fact, you may discover that there's a place where you're saying, I'm really only used to doing this, and this looks really good. This might be the things like spend this year. If there's something that you want to try integrating into your homeschool experience that you haven't done before, then it might be worth, figuring out what can you do on autopilot? What do you already know how to do comfortably? And then try experimenting with something new, with a new classroom technique, with a new method of teaching, with a new approach to teaching in one area.
Can you give a specific example?
All right. So a really good example might be, all right, I love Charlotte Mason, and I'm going to at some point do like a video essay about her.
We've got to plan that series.
Very, very important educator to be aware of. And
very quickly, English woman, early 19th century, had a lot of educational ideals, very similar to what Maria Montessori was doing in Italy.
In some respects, but not in others.
But different, yeah. And the Waldorf movement took place in Germany at about the same time. We kind of need like an overview of the history of...
Yeah.
Anyway, Charlotte Mason. A lot of it is very beautiful and very elegant. And unfortunately, reading a lot of Charlotte Mason inspired blogs and books, you tend to develop the idea that you need to buy a country estate and run away from the world and just kind of raise your children in this bucolic ideal.
Yes.
That wasn't what she was talking about doing, but it is the net effect that I remember
it
you
is the net effect. But let's just say that I want to do the Charlotte Mason approach to art.
Okay.
Picture study is very different from art history taught in a typical manner. So if you're doing art history in a normal school, you've got a book, and it's got a book of pictures, and you've got biographies of the artists.
Some slides projected on them. Do they even use slides anymore?
No. Well, you use the equivalent. You'd have like a PowerPoint slide presentation rather than, actual like translucent
PowerPoint.
things. Yeah. don't go there. So
that's a rant for a separate day.
Definitely.
Loathe PowerPoint.
So if you're talking sort of a standard American classroom approach, like whether it's college level, high school level,
certainly our art and architecture course when we lived in Rome was a bunch of slides and a very dull text and lots of lectures about the area of the Basilica that we slept through.
And depending on the time period,
it was always right after lunch too.
Life of the artist and things like that, influence on society. That's a very standard approach.
So and so took dope, ran around, and then killed himself.
Or killed other people and then had to go and escape the city. That one at least did good art.
Yeah. Anyway,
if you were studying Caravaggio in that class, that's probably what you'd remember. If you're going to do a picture study of one of Caravaggio's paintings, though, it's very different in the Charlotte Mason approach. You're going to have the picture, you're going to have it in a size your child can handle.
So postcard size, or like an 8 by 10, 8.5 by 11,
8.5 by 11, letter paper
portrait size print.
And you're going to have
that dated me.
Yes.
Can you still get portrait sized prints?
Yes.
Oh, you can?
Yes, you can. You can even go to the J.C. Penney's or Sears and get the whole picture studio thing.
Really? They still do that?
Yeah.
I had no idea. Yeah. I haven't been out of my house in 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, not quite true, but
you're not Nero Wolfe yet.
I don't have the custom built chair.
So, and you really don't care for yellow as a color.
Well, you're a lot more fetching than Archie Goodwin.
Thank you. So if you're doing the Charlotte Mason style picture study, you're going to have that picture, and you're just going to spend time having the child look at the picture and describe it. They're going to spend time looking at the art and taking time to really dig into what's there.
Which sounds very soothing and restful and inspirational.
For the child. For you, the teacher, you have to be very aware of how to guide them through this kind of work. If you're doing, and everything with Charlotte Mason requires a teacher who's very present, very engaged, very familiar with the teaching techniques and style. It requires self-education. And if you're inspired by someone who's talking all about how beautiful Charlotte Mason is and how gentle it is, it's like, you're going to want to buy all the Charlotte Mason things, and then you're going to discover that it's work.
Not only does it work for you as the teacher, and any sound pedagogical method is going to be work for the teacher. But so anyone selling the idea that you can do home education without educating yourself, without doing the work of a teacher, you're adding that to the list of things you do and the menu. But anyone who's selling that is also, they're selling that.
Yes.
And I have come away from a lot of Charlotte Mason inspired stuff with the impression these people never had toddlers, or they certainly never had toddlers hopped up on sugar.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, they never had boys who would rather be building forts all day.
Which is an important thing to keep in mind. So
not everyone who speaks authoritatively from a podium or a dais at a conference or speaks authoritatively on a webinar has any clue what they're talking about. Some do. That's wonderful. Some don't. That's also wonderful. But even the ones who do know what they're talking about and have, 20 years of experience to speak authoritatively still aren't in your specific particular situation. So what may have worked for us, what may work for any of a dozen people I can think of who I know who have homeschooled over the years, what may have worked well for some of the people we know who developed their curriculum with their own kids and are now marketing and selling it to the parents of other children. Just because it worked for them or worked for them 15 years ago or for their goals doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You've got to find your comfort zone.
Yeah. And you need to recognize that even if you're inspired to want to try something new, you have to give yourself time. So you say, I'm going to try this Charlotte Mason approach. I'm going to dig in and understand it. I'll use the summer to do it. And I'm going to spend one subject area where I'm going to try this.
Right.
And that way you, discover, can you do this? Can you start expanding that approach to other things and really embrace it? Or are you going to find it's not a good fit for your family? It's not a good fit for the amount of time you have developed. And that brings us into the other area, which is resources
and constraints. That's a very natural lead-in. Beautifully
yes,
done.
Thank you. So you may know what you're comfortable doing and you may know what you want to do, but now you have to look at what is going to be available to you. And resources and constraints can include a number of things. Some of them are monetary.
That's the first one most people think
Yeah.
of. Even in the business world, when we talk about resources and constraints, the first thing everybody alights on is what's my budget and how limited is it? And sometimes they'll recognize that time is also a constraint. How much time do we have to get the thing done?
And those are two important ones to keep in mind. They are
critical.
Like, if you want to do Latin and you don't know Latin, you're probably going to need a tutor.
You've got two options at that point. One, spend the time teaching yourself Latin.
So time.
Well, and sometimes money.
Yes.
Or hire someone who already has that expertise to do that. And that is certainly an option. It's one we've pursued. For all that I've got a fairly decent command of Latin, Laura's got a solid grounding in it.
And that's a personal resource.
We had a friend who she was very serious about teaching her kids Latin. She herself did not know Latin. She put in the time and effort to learn Latin.
We know a few people who've done that.
But even she reached a point where her children outpaced her ability to keep up. And that was when she had to start finding classes and hiring tutors. And she managed to do it.
For us, it was less the personal mastery level than it was the time.
Yes.
And we have put our children into Latin classes for our oldest because it just reached the point where we didn't have the time, and we found tutors who were teaching in a way that we thought was going to be fruitful.
Yeah.
And so that was a case of we had the money, we did not have the time. And so even though technically we could have done it ourselves, it was not the best choice to do it ourselves at that point.
Right.
And so that's how
And our oldest is now at a level where he could be teaching us.
Yes.
If he had any interest in teaching Latin whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. But communal resources are a place where that comes in also, because at this point, our son is part of our community.
Before we move on to communal resources.
Okay.
Are there other personal resources or constraints you can think of?
Well,
obviously what you know and can share, because you can't hand on what you haven't received. If you want to give your children a liberal arts education, but you yourself have not received one because you went to college, maybe you didn't go to college, maybe you went to college, but you focused on business or what's now called STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math.
Which means you might be in a great place for teaching some of the maths and sciences. I have a friend, she was, I think she had something like a physical therapy. She had
been a pre-med in undergrad and then went into physical therapy before she got married.
So she ended up loving teaching a lot of the sciences and felt very much in her comfort zone doing that for a lot of the arts and for the arts side.
For liberal arts, and what might be called natural philosophy, traditionally, she was a lot less comfortable. She ended up helping form a co-op. She found a friend of hers, who had a master's degree in a liberal arts discipline and was very comfortable with things like literature, literary analysis, and Socratic discussion and leading seminars. And the two of them combined forces, and that worked really well. We've seen that with a lot of our friends and that's where you get into the question of communal resources. But I just want to press in from communal resources for a second, because I think it's very important. You've got to evaluate what are your personal resources and constraints. I may have a skill, but do I have the time in addition to the work I do, earning a living, keeping up with the household?
And that's a good point, because a lot of
the children's activities.
A lot of people are maybe trying to do this even while keeping maybe working from home. But even if they're not trying to do that, if you've got a side hustle you're running, you don't have a job you have to report to, but you've got an Etsy store that you have to keep running, or you do some other business on the side, that is a constraint.
Yes.
And if that's, that's going to mean that you're not going to do as many hands-on classes. You may have to look at more things that are not 100% self-directed, but say 80% self-directed material, and you're going to have to focus on that.
Age appropriate, because it's wholly inappropriate to try and expect self-directed work from a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, or even I would say a 10 or a 12-year-old.
Right.
A 12-year-old is beginning the transition to self-directed work.
Late middle school into sort of high school age, you can start doing a lot more self-directed work. You can start doing a lot more online classes where you've actually got a chance of real engagement and actually able to follow. I've got exactly one online class that my little kids do. It's a Zoom call. It's enrichment, and only one of ours really digs it.
Well, and she's 12.
Yeah, she's 12. So that makes sense.
The younger two kind of like being on camera and chatting, but they don't like listening to everybody else. They're still in the mix, but it's not really their thing.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. That is perfectly age appropriate.
Yeah. So keep in mind that, if you've got something running that limits your personal time, that's going to be a place where if you've got older kids, you might be able to take advantage of.
Well, and the fact is, as parents, we all have things that limit our personal time.
Yes.
So remember, time is a constraint. Obviously, money is going to be a very obvious constraint. What you have and can hand on, or what you can easily acquire to hand on.
I think emotional resources too might actually be a place
there.
Yes,
emotional resources. That's one that I don't know that I've ever seen covered in any of the material we've looked at over the last 20 years.
And I think that the way to think about that is recognize that every new thing you do is going to be a drain on your energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more new things you're trying to do, the more stressed you're going to be, because they're not yet in the part of your body the part of your whole person that can deal with it on autopilot.
And that holds true for your children as well. The more new things you're throwing at them all at once, the more overwhelmed they will be, the more stressed they will become, the more likely you are to trigger a meltdown.
So hold that thought in place, because we're going to get back to that in just a little bit.
Because communal resources are one of the ways that you deal with that set of personal constraints.
So communal resources are the recognition that you probably have friends, and some of those friends may also be homeschooling. Or you might be able, through the wonders of the internet, find other people who are like-minded, also homeschooling, with whom you can trade.
And I would say not just homeschooling. Mm-hmm. Like, don't limit yourself.
Yeah.
We have several friends who teach in institutional schools. One has done enrichment music activities with us over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who teaches sciences, physics in particular.
Yeah.
He's got his doctorate. He's taught in prep schools for the last 30 years, loves what he does, but he is more than happy to hang out with us for a while. And as the kids have questions about topics where he has expertise, he gets the delight of talking about them.
Yeah.
It's in a
He loves rocketry, astronomy, that sort of thing.
It's nothing so formal as a structured class. He's not coming in and lecturing, but he gets to talk about things that he really enjoys. And our kids get to learn from him in a relaxed and social environment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another aspect of communal resources, is expand your definition of what schooling is.
Yeah. And so, yes, there is the co-op, and the co-op is an excellent way to help.
And we're involved in one.
Yeah.
Finally. I mean, we were not involved in co-ops when we had really young kids. We tried a few.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't find that they were particularly
well. Each co-op has a different focus. Sometimes a co-op is what you might call a cottage school, where you've got a number of people who come together and they pool their resources of money and expertise to be able to say, like, I'm good at sciences, or I'm good at language arts, or I can teach French, or whatever it is. And each of them is able to bring in their expertise. And thus you have the advantage that each of you is trading your time and contributing to the co-op. That's one way to do it. I have heard of co-ops where they basically pooled money to hire a tutor.
Yes.
Other co-ops are more focused. I have been in ones where it was primarily an opportunity to get some of the physical education in that couldn't be done otherwise, because they found that most people were pretty happy with their academic side, but the social aspect of, it's hard to play a lot of your sports, when you've got your
If you've only got 1 or 2 kids, team sports are right out.
and
So
even if
either
you've got 6 like us, it is not fair to pit the 19-year-old against the 8-year-old. You just shouldn't do that.
Well, by 19, the 19-year-old has a sense of how to modify his competitive behavior to assist the 8-year-old.
Yes.
But again, that takes a certain amount of development and experience, and some of that he got by doing peer group activities.
Exactly. And so that a co-op can be just mostly for those peer group activities, things where you want a larger number of people
Yeah.
who can all do that together. And clubs actually work really nicely for the same
Clubs
way.
are fantastic. So something that I did when I was a kid, and I was in institutional schools, I was in parochial schools in Southeast Louisiana, and then I was in private school and then public schools up in the Philadelphia area. So I remember begging my mother to let me homeschool myself when I was, a teenager, and she was convinced we would be, arrested or something like that. But I was in institutional schools, but one of the things that my parents did is they found out there were some college enrichment classes at one of the local colleges, and they signed me up for them. It was like a 2-week mini course kind of thing, and I don't know if schools still do this.
I know my community college did that. I think I did a summer course in gemology.
I remember being what I would have been like 8 or 9 years old. And I remember I took courses on creative writing. I wrote a mystery novel at like 8. It wasn't very long. It was terrible. It was terrible. But I wrote and illustrated it as part of the class project over this mini course. I had one where it was a guy who had like a public access TV show where he did juggling and miming and clowning, and I really liked him. And I remember going to a course he did on playing games, and I couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old.
Mhm.
But we spent 2 weeks, and I learned how to play a whole host of interactive social games. I'm trying to remember some of the names, like Murderer Among Us, or
Oh, that's the one that we did.
Versipellis. We didn't learn Versipellis in Latin, but it was basically that.
Yeah, so I went to this wonderful 2-day retreat done all in spoken Latin.
The glee with which you say that is so delightful.
Thank you. It really is fun. But one of the things they did is it's a teacher training workshop, and recognizing that if you're going to teach Latin, being able to teach it and being comfortable speaking it, you
can create an environment that is much more immersive, the way a modern language classroom handles it.
And one of the ways to do this that is really, really effective is games. And one of the games that we did, and she said, the teacher leading it says she does this as sort of like an end of semester treat for the students. Right. One, you have to get to the point where they have enough Latin to do this, but it's that sort of Murder Among Us game. But this one was called Versipellis, Skin Changer. It's you've got a werewolf in town, and of course the werewolf only comes out at night, so there's a day-night cycle as part of the game. Really fun. That kind of game.
And anyway, he was in the process of writing a book. I don't think he ever published the book. I looked him up online once the internet became a thing, because all of this occurred pre-internet.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. As far as communal resources, there are a wealth of low cost and free resources. There are a wealth of resources where experts are teaching. We have a couple of Patreons we support because the Latin work they put out is so fantastically high caliber.
And we have friends starting YouTube channels to support their
one of ours just is starting a beginning Greek class, Shrub of Knowledge. We should promote it.
Yeah, I'll throw it into the show notes.
All of this is to say, you are part of a community. You've got the community of your own household. And, what can I do when Laura is slammed with other household stuff? What can I do when she's sick and needs to just sleep in? Do I take a day off of my day job and, or do I in between calls? And this frequently happens. The kids will bring their book work to me, and I either know enough to correct it, or I can use the teacher's manual to correct it in between calls.
Speaking of teacher's manuals, for the courses that have it, are one of the reasons why, even if you're like, I couldn't teach this, like, actually you can. There's a script.
Yeah. So again, that falls under communal resources. Better curriculum materials, and I have a whole rant about curriculum and what that actually should mean, that I will avoid going down that rabbit hole, but I maybe do that as I don't anyway. Curriculum materials, the materials you use, the better materials will come with teacher's guides. The teacher's guides are as close as you're going to get to an easy button for teaching a subject you're unfamiliar with. You still need to read through the materials the kids have. You still need to read through the materials the teachers have. But as far as communal resources, you've got the materials you're teaching from. You've got your household and whatever that dynamic is. You've got your immediate community. Do you have relatives who are supportive of this? Do you have relatives who are opposed to this? You might not want to involve them in your homeschooling challenges. Do you have friends? Can you make them? Is there a local homeschool group or co-op? I know we're members of a church. We have a lot of adolescent girls in the community. A lot of them will do babysitting type stuff. Many of them will do it for free. Some will do it for a modest fee. So draw on what resources you can to help. Form co-ops if you need to, or find them. But then when you get beyond that immediate local community, which can be very, very powerful, you've got this whole potentially overwhelming world of the internet. But again, if you come back to, why am I homeschooling? What am I trying to accomplish? And where is my comfort zone? What's a little bit beyond where I'm at, or what's just a bridge too far for myself, for my child, for, if you've got a rambunctious boy or a special needs girl, that's going to change what you think is appropriate. And you can, work with people to help define and refine these things, but you've got this whole universe. And so again, if you figure out
another point about communal resources is don't we have a son who's been in therapy.
Yeah.
To deal with some with occupational therapy. And she has been working with him, among other things, with things like typing speed.
Yes.
And so don't discount, if you do have a child who's special needs, recognize that whoever you're working with professionals is part of your communal resources.
Our oldest was struggling to learn to read, and he was getting older and older and still struggling to learn to read. And we thought we were having a discipline problem, that he wouldn't stay on the couch when we were watching TV, and he would get up and drift to one particular point in the room. It finally dawned on us, maybe he just can't see. And so we talked to a friend who had a son who had some really severe visual issues, and she recommended the vision. I mean, he's an optometrist, ophthalmologist, the one who's a doctor.
Yes.
Whichever. Anyway, that particular one specialized in vision therapy. And so we went, and sure enough, he couldn't see. And so more
importantly, his eyes didn't work together.
Well, he couldn't see, his eyes didn't work. He had a whole host of visual problems. We couldn't afford the therapy at the time. So he spent time in office visits training us in what we could do at home, so that was within our means. It meant time, but we had more time than money at the time.
Yeah. And
so he would wear his glasses, and we would do the exercises, and over time his vision corrected. He's and that's always an option too.
And not only did he become a strong reader, but he actually likes writing too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that was not overnight. That took easily a decade to get to that point. Regarding communal constraints, one of the communal constraints that a lot of people get concerned, and I know this is a consistent concern of yours, because even though we live in a state where homeschooling is generally supported by the existing government and educational
We fall into
bureaucracy.
the low to no regulation realm. It's very permissive, but there
are states and countries where it is far, far more restrictive. That's its own special set of challenges and constraints. In my experience, the best place to start is with an organization like the Homeschool Legal Defense Association.
And most
This is
states
not a
also-
paid promotion.
No.
We've just been members for
probably a decade.
well, almost 20 years
Yeah.
now, because we right when we started.
Yeah. But there's that one is national. Most states have one as well. And
Yeah.
for the states, that actually may be your best place to start, because
Yes.
they'll help you understand what are you legally required to do. And thus you can help figure out sort of what are
you doing and how does it fit in those boxes? Or how do you make sure you check those boxes off while still doing what you know is best for your children? And again, those kinds of communal constraints
they shouldn't lead the
no.
They shouldn't lead the thing. It's not I live in California, so I have to find an umbrella school. If you're in a state where one of the things you need is what's called an umbrella school, where there's a private school that you technically belong to, that may be an aspect of what's going to drive what you do.
But the better umbrella schools will still let you stitch your curriculum as you need
exactly. And so what you have to do is start with what are you trying to achieve, and then you can find an umbrella school that's going to work with your vision for what you're trying to do, rather than starting with that and then working backwards and finding yourself caught in a new box.
Right. So, I mean, all of that is to say, know what you're trying to do and why. Know what you can accomplish with the resources you have available personally and socially, communally. But when you're looking at this world of curriculum, and I mean, I remember the first Rainbow Resource Catalog we got. It was like 2 inches thick of itty bitty print. And that was 20 years ago. Yeah. And the offerings have expanded since then.
And it doesn't even cover everything.
There's a million internet courses available. There's free ones, there's paid ones. How do you choose? How do you filter that?
And I think that's where there's a couple of principles to keep in mind. So remember, I asked you to put a pin a while back in that idea of needing time and getting overwhelmed by all of this new material. One of the principles you need to keep in mind is to keep it simple.
Yes.
And that's to recognize that there's all of these subject areas and there's all of these things you could do. And
90% of it is utterly meaningless.
Yeah. So you can really go back to like the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, as it was said.
So if your child is reading, read good books aloud to them that are slightly beyond where they're at. Encourage them to read good books that are at their level or slightly below. And if they're writing, make sure they've actually got good penmanship.
Yeah. Good penmanship. And
because penmanship, whether you're doing manuscript print or cursive, you can lead into copy work.
Yeah. And copy work does a lot of things. It helps to improve handwriting over time through practice. It also is an opportunity to fill their minds with excellent material.
For arithmetic, we've actually been really pleased with Khan Academy in that it is free, it is graduated, it is self-correcting and reinforcing. Now, especially for our youngers and even some of our olders, we still have to get involved. We still have to be present to help them learn how to work through a problem and solve it, or elaborate where the video isn't quite as explicit as maybe it needed to be for where that child is that day. And there are plenty of days where it's like, all right, we've done enough. It's time to go ahead and log out and just go out and play, or go play with the Legos, or you know what? It's 110 degrees. The squirrels are melting into the pavement. We're going to pull out a board game. And we play a board game, or we watch a movie. And there were certainly days like that. But keep it really, really simple, especially if you are just transitioning to this. It's so easy. And I know we did it when we were first homeschooling. I see new homeschoolers do it all the time. They want to do all the things because there's a fear you're going to miss something.
Yeah.
And
there's a fear you're going to miss something, or that you can only legitimately doing this if you're doing better than the local private school.
Well, and that brings us to perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yes.
Even if the local private school is fantastic. Even if the local public school is fantastic.
One, keep in mind that the whole reason that you're homeschooling isn't so that you can somehow do better than the local school.
Well, hopefully.
Hopefully.
I mean, you may have some people that is their why.
Yes.
We knew someone like that.
Yes.
She was a very interesting person to know.
Yes. And occasionally, if the area you could afford to live in is not the school district you wanted to be in, that might be a legitimate reason why you're homeschooling. But outperforming the local school is not what you're trying to do.
Outperforming, and comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes.
And that really is true.
Yeah.
In so many areas, not just homeschooling, not just, comparison is the thief of joy. You're not trying to make your child better than the neighbor, the Joneses across the street. What you're trying to do is help them be better human beings.
Yeah.
The best human being they can be, and you have to do it one day at a time.
And so you don't want to get overwhelmed with trying to do all the things. And you also have to recognize, if you stick to language arts and maths, all of your worries about, say, if you're doing just transitioning, don't worry about, oh no, do I have social studies? Do I have sciences here? If you're working with an elementary aged student, you really don't have to worry about that. If you send them outside and tell them to count how many birds and which kind they had, congratulations, you're doing science. If you're baking,
and better science than 90% of the institutions out there.
If you're baking and you hand them an Alton Brown cookbook, you're probably doing science.
Oh, as long as you're working through the cookbook with them.
Well, that's true. But I mean, even if you just have them read the cookbook,
because you've got some chemistry up in there, you've got some food history, and you've got the practical skill of cooking or baking.
Yeah. And so a lot of the elements of natural,
everything becomes potentially educational. Everything in the normal family life.
And so what you do is you recognize, keep the school materials of formal schooling simple, and then be open to the teaching opportunities. Everything occurs. If you're worried about history, just make a point that some of the read alouds are going to be oriented toward that. And they'll probably remember more about the Revolution reading Johnny Tremaine than if they had to read an actual.
I don't know about Johnny Tremaine, but
that one actually wasn't that bad. I enjoyed that one.
Okay, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, dear.
Okay, we'll go. How about the Middle Ages and Door in the Wall?
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Battle of Hastings and
King's Shadow.
King's Shadow was fantastic.
A well-chosen read aloud or personal reading book.
I've got a bent for medieval history, and I learned stuff from that book.
Yeah.
So
a well-chosen read aloud or book can do more than a formal class. And so keep the formal classes simple. Stick to the ones that are most important, the skills that are most important, while you're getting your feet firmly planted there.
And I mean, like, my rule of thumb is no more than 20 minutes a day, 3 days a week, depending on grade level. So like if you got a first grader, school should be done in 20 minutes. Now, if the kid wants to drag it out for 3 hours, that's a separate problem. But in general, 20 minutes of material is more than adequate for like a first or second grader. As you get on towards middle school,
you've got a few hours of work, but
you might get to an hour and a half a day, maybe, of concentrated effort. And again, it may be spread out. Once you get to high school, things get a little different. But again, that depends on what are your goals. If your goals are with your high schooler are to get through the high school graduation requirements so that they can enter an apprenticeship for a trade, those are different than if you're trying to do a college prep program, or if by the time they finish high school at 17, 18, 19 years old, they've already got an associate's degree or even a bachelor's degree.
And we've seen all of those happen with different of our friends.
Yeah.
Your goals are going to drive.
Your goals should be driving your decisions around these things. So keep it simple, especially if you're new at this, especially if none of the homeschooling activities come naturally because you've never done this before. You need to give yourself a lot of grace, give yourself a lot of space to adjust, and keep it really, really simple.
Because you're going to execute better if you're only trying to do a few things well rather than trying to do everything.
And I think the third principle, so keep it simple. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good.
And don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. I wanted to expand on just a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
That can be that sense of comparison and competitiveness,
Yes.
but it can also be getting hung up on you. Again, you went to a homeschooling conference and someone talked about how this is the best way to do X. Now, it may be objectively true that certain teaching methods are better than others. I will note that for reading, I think phonics is the way to go. Thankfully, it's also the simple way to go.
Yes.
100 easy lessons. Teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons. It's about as easy peasy as it gets. And while there may be better, more teacher-involved methods, do not make the perfect the enemy of the good. It is still phonics-based, and it will still get your child reading. And what you want...
I don't think we've ever actually gotten through all 100 lessons.
I have. One of the children, I got through all 100.
Okay.
Because
usually we get like somewhere up in the 60s, and the kids are like, no, I know what I'm doing, and they're off like a shot.
It's a personality thing.
Ah.
All right, so... quick thing
that might be another constraint.
No, this is worth thinking about. So if you happen to have kids who are video game players, you will observe that some of them are the ones, I just want to beat the game. Some of them get bored with the game, and then there are the ones who are 100%ers. They go and they find a walkthrough, and they find the walkthrough to make sure that they can complete the game 100%. That was one of those children.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
that makes a lot.
Yeah,
of sense.
If you've got a child who's a completionist,
yeah,
they're the ones who are going to actually insist on getting through the entire course. Whereas for a lot of them, once they're reading strongly, once they're making their way through Magic Treehouse books and doing fine, they're going to say, Mom, I really don't need to do lesson 86.
That's really when you start shifting to offering them, recommending for them the good books. But Good Books, Great Books is its own. We need to do a show on that.
That would definitely be a good show to do.
So, yeah, but, begin with the end in mind. Recognize your strengths, limitations, your resources and constraints, and kind of where's your comfort zone. And then keep it simple. Easy plus one is a mantra, both for new material you're introducing to your children and for yourself. Find the easy and then make it just a little bit difficult. And if it's too much, you back off. I'm for the first time in my life learning to lift weights.
Yeah.
And so I got together with a friend of mine who's been lifting for years. I'm like, okay, show me the basics so that I can do this without hurting myself. And I'm going to start with an empty bar. And okay, I may be on an empty bar for a while, depending on how frequently I lift and so forth. But as with any new thing you're going to learn or relearn, I studied Greek once upon a time, but I was a terrible Greek student because I was absolutely more interested in beer drinking and frisbee chucking than looking at oddly shaped squiggles on a page and trying to parse out, the
you
tense
were an
and
indifferent
voice.
Scholar at the time.
I'm still an indifferent scholar. I'm still an indifferent scholar. But I find myself coming to a point in life where it's like, you know what, I kind of regret not spending more time with my Greek. So let me talk to my friends who know and teach Greek. Okay. So we're going to baby steps. We're going to start with the alphabet and the phonics of ancient Greek, and then we're going to work forward from there. So anything else you wanted to add to the topic tonight?
I think
today, this morning.
Yeah, this
what time
morning,
of day?
This morning.
The sun's over the yard arm somewhere.
Yeah, the sun has only just risen, and it's not quite the brutal Texas summer yet. But no, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. That easy plus one principle is really important because you want to be able to recognize a large chunk of things you want to be able to have on autopilot so that you have that energy to devote to one or two things and figure out what those are so that you can recognize consistency is what's important. Find the path that's going to allow you to be consistent.
Yes.
And if you can find the path that's going to allow you to consistently execute over time, your children are going to be heading where you want them to head.
Yes.
Um,
Consistent, disciplined execution. As the twig is bent, the tree is inclined.
Exactly. So I think that wraps it up for today.
All right. Yeah, that definitely wraps it up for today. If you know why you're homeschooling, and where you're comfortable starting, or what you can keep on autopilot while you experiment with some new things, and what your resources and constraints are, and we need a little better rhetorical structure to that. Anyway, if you know those things, you can quickly assess curriculum offerings to see if they fit your school plan. Keep it simple, aim for the good, not the perfect. You can do this. If you have any questions, you can leave a message in the comments or contact us by email or through social media. Links are all in the show notes below. If you found this helpful, please share it with your friends. Until next week, ciao, ciao.